Economics is not just the study of shifting numbers and moving containers. It is a series of sharp insights used to puncture a mythology conceived to control you. Just as medicine is concerned with the movement of energy inside the human body, economics is concerned with the movement of energy between 8 billion people on Earth. In both disciplines, believing in myths can lead to life and death consequences. Politicians draw upon great-sounding economic ideas to get elected. Yet, when these are applied, the results are disappointing or even catastrophic. As a human being living on Earth, you cannot escape economics. Even if you find this subject overwhelming, nebulous, or even intimidating, you only stand to gain from dispelling the false beliefs clouding around it. So, join me in the debunking of the biggest myths in economics. A major myth still lurking around is that economics is a zero-sum game, meaning that in order for one person to gain something, another person must lose. In reality, if people choose to trade with one another, it is because both parties stand to benefit. If a person gives a certain amount of currency for a good, it means he values the good more than the amount of currency he paid for it. If economics really was a zero-sum game, we would still be living like our Stone Age ancestors because no wealth would have been created. There is no fixed pie of riches frozen in time. The wealth of a society can always be expanded in order for everyone to get more. This is why you, right now, have access to many more delicious spices than Emperor Charlemagne, more horsepower than Genghis Khan, faster communications than Queen Victoria, and much more computing power than John F. Kennedy. Human experience can always be enhanced, human well-being can always be improved, and human time can always be optimized. So how does a society get wealthier? 2 words: capital accumulation. To increase the amount of life-improving goods and services we can get, and to have more leisure time to enjoy our lives, we need to increase our production. Capital goods are objects, gadgets, machines, even software that increase economic productivity. A single person can harvest 100 times more wheat using a combine harvester than using a sickle. Maybe that would have been a better symbol for a socialist utopia. In short, there is no limit to how productive, and therefore how wealthy, we can become if we allocate our resources efficiently. When all people are free to accumulate capital goods in a free market economy, the result is a positive-sum game. When you ask ordinary people where the value of something comes from, they often have to stop and think. They usually answer something like, well, the value of something comes from the work put into it. This is called the labor theory of value. You can forgive ordinary people for thinking that the value of something comes from the labor put into it, since the idea was advanced by Karl Marx himself. Yet, it is wrong. I could spend an entire year making a full-size car out of Legos, and by the end, I will have nothing close to the value of the average car manufactured by Toyota in a day, let alone 365 times the value. In a free market economy, you cannot force people to like and use something because you put X amount of hours into making it. You can only create something that people will voluntarily acquire, no matter the amount of hours you put into it. Confronted with that fact, people will say something like, well, then value comes from scarcity. Also false. A one-of-a-kind stamp could be treasured by a stamp collector and be worthless to me, The same goes for baseball cards, antique lamps, vintage guitars, and so on. After agreeing with this, people will capitulate with, all right, value comes from utility. We're getting close, but that's still not completely accurate because different things have different utility for different people at different times. So here's the truth. Value comes from one place and one place only, your subjective perception. In the words of Carl Menger, value does not exist outside the consciousness of man. The value of goods arises from their relationship to our needs and is not inherent in the goods themselves. With changes in this relationship, value arises and disappears. The economy is driven by individual human choices, not by mathematical formulas and abstract concepts. But to be more precise, perceived value comes from the marginal utility of a good or a service in your life right now. Let's say you just finished running a marathon through a scorching desert, and I'm standing at the finish line to sell you a bottle of cold, fresh, bubbly water. That bottle will have maximal value to you at that moment. It will be more valuable than anything else on earth. Now, imagine I'm trying to sell you the exact same bottle of water, but this time you're sitting in your house, you're not thirsty, and you already have 100 identical bottles of water. What will my bottle be worth to you? Probably nothing. That's how it works for any other product or service in the economy. Some goods have positive or neutral value for some people and negative value for others. I would be willing to pay $30 for a ribeye steak, but if a vegan got that same ribeye steak as a gift, he would just give it to me for free. Well then, if all value is subjective, where do prices come from? As you already know, in a free market, prices change. They keep adjusting according to supply and demand. Your product or service will be valued on its capacity to satisfy a need in the market. Its value will fluctuate based on how efficiently you can combine resources to produce it, how much marginal utility consumers will get from it, and how much better it is compared to competitors. In short, there is no intrinsic value in any economic good. It is therefore your job to create something that people will value of their own accord. The word profit has been distorted into a negative meaning by what comes down to socialist propaganda. Envious intellectuals are quick to portray the profits of successful entrepreneurs as being bad for society. Yet, the profit motive is the price to pay for efficiency in a market economy. The potential reward of profits is what incentivizes the entrepreneur to postpone gratification, study people's needs, take risks, and administer resources as effectively as possible. The people who are ready to sacrifice the present for the future and the certain for the uncertain end up making all of us wealthier. For every capitalist who succeeds in generating profits, many more fail. The motivation of profits and the fear of losses are impersonal mechanisms guiding the choices of producers. In the end, profit is what an entrepreneur gets for providing what his customers want in a better or cheaper way than his competitors. Profits are not something you take from others, but a small share you get to keep of the value you created for others. Johann Norberg, The Capitalist Manifesto. Historically, the abolition of profits has not led to more affordable goods and more freedom. Rather, it led to shortages and exploitation. The price of socialism is inefficiency. If profits were only an evil way to exploit workers, then all for-profit businesses would have been outcompeted by non-profits. Without the need for profits, Non-profit companies could manufacture and sell goods at much lower prices than for-profit companies. In reality, however, non-profits have very little incentive to be efficient with their resources. They are almost always outcompeted by for-profit competitors. In short, the profit motive generates more wealth for all by inciting the most productive use of resources. Savings are the basis for economic growth. Financial energy must first be set aside before it can be invested into capital goods. When people save, they invest in their future selves. Saving is the mother of capital. Only by deferring consumption can capital goods exist. Seyfeddin Amous, Principles of Economics. John Maynard Keynes popularized the myth that too much savings is bad for the economy. He argued that reduced consumer spending will slow down economic activity and lead to more unemployment. Therefore, he claimed, to avoid a recession, the government should increase its spending and inflate its currency to push its citizens to spend instead of saving. Keynes was proven wrong multiple times by history, notably by the high inflation and high unemployment in the United States during the 1970s. Yet, his theories created another mythical boogeyman: deflation. Deflation, you might have guessed, is the opposite of inflation. It happens when money gains in purchasing power instead of losing. A deflating currency can be exchanged for more goods in the future than today. Needless to say, deflation encourages savings, yet it also makes debts harder to repay, which is why, in our debt-based economy, deflation was twisted into a dangerous idea. In reality, deflation happens naturally when economic output grows faster than the amount of money in circulation. Under the gold standard of the late 19th and early 20th century, it was inevitable. The European and American economies grew faster than the gold supply. People had access to a simple savings technology. The gold standard ushered the golden age of innovation. Accumulated savings were invested into inventions such as the light bulb, the telephone, the radio, the camera, the automobile, the airplane, and more. Contrary to fiat mythology, deflation does not deter people from spending their money. It deters them from wasting it. In order to live, we need to consume food, clothing, shelter, and hundreds of other goods and services. A deflationary currency will make us more selective and demand higher quality from producers. Instead of buying cheap, ephemeral gizmos, we will opt for reliable and durable goods. A sound monetary medium will improve the efficient allocation of resources in the economy. In short, savings and deflation are ingredients for economic flourishing. But more on that in the next myth. People nowadays are conditioned to believe that money is a creation of the state. In reality, the most reliable monetary mediums came from competition in the free market. Money is not an invention of the state. It is not the product of a legislative act. Even the sanction of political authority is not necessary for its existence. Certain commodities came to be money quite naturally as the result of economic relationships that were independent of the power of the state. Karl Menger, Principles of Economics. As an example, in the 19th and 20th century, the most powerful states had to accept gold as money because it outcompeted all other commodities in the market. The same is happening with Bitcoin right now. For more on that, you can check out my previous video, Bitcoin, what it is, what it's for, and why we need it. Money is not a collective illusion either. We cannot just pick any object and make it money. For example, if we all collectively decided that paper clips were money, Paperclip manufacturers would ramp up production, flood the market, and devalue everybody's paperclip savings. To be reliable, the monetary medium has to be difficult to produce for everyone. The government and the central bank do not create real money. They print fiduciary media called fiat currency that passes as money because they legally require citizens to use it. Central bank bureaucrats manipulate the price of borrowing by adjusting interest rates. When these rates are artificially lowered, investors are encouraged to borrow and to make riskier investments. When these rates are unexpectedly hiked, consumers and businesses are pushed closer to insolvency on their loans, which ends up in bankruptcies and squandered resources. So most economic waste is not a symptom of capitalism, but of central planning interfering in the free market. The growth at all costs mentality, again, comes from the pressure businesses face to beat the monetary inflation created by the government and the central bank. If a company's revenues remain exactly the same for years in a row, the company is actually losing money because it isn't keeping up with inflation. In a deflationary system, companies would just need to have stable profits to enrich their shareholders. Growth would be a bonus, not a necessity. For more on that, check out my What is Money video. In short, the unreliable, centralized monetary medium we are forced to use by government is a main source of inefficiency and waste in an otherwise productive capitalist system. The myth of overpopulation and finite resources has been going on for 2 centuries, despite all facts pointing to the opposite. Thomas Malthus popularized the myth in his 1798 An Essay on the Principle of Population. He claimed that the human population will grow faster than its ability to produce food, which will cause famine, disease, and conflict. In reality, the capital accumulation in the agricultural sector ushered an abundance of food production. The human population grew exponentially and overall living standards improved. Yes, there were isolated incidents of famine, but they were few and far between. And in most cases, they were due to resource mismanagement, not absence of resources. What constitutes the practical and realistic limit to the quantity of any resource is always the amount of human time that is directed towards producing it, as this is the only real scarce resource. Seyfeddin Ammous, Principles of Economics. The truth is that resources on Earth are so abundant that we can't calculate a finite number for most of them. As we explore more, we discover more. Since 1980, petroleum reserves have increased 3 times faster than petroleum consumption. Technological innovation allowed humanity to use denser forms of energy. We used to get only 16 megajoules of energy from burning a kilogram of firewood. Now we can get up to 3,900,000 megajoules of energy from a kilogram of uranium-235. Here is a simple scientific fact. The sun shines more energy on the Earth in an hour than all of humanity consumes in a year. There is no energy scarcity, only energy mismanagement. The degrowth narrative is too convenient for central planners who want to tell us what and how much we're allowed to produce and consume. And to those leftist alarmists, I say, how dare you? Of course, we should maintain a clean environment wherever possible, but not at the expense of keeping people in poverty. For hundreds of millions of people worldwide, access to cheap, reliable energy can make the difference between life and death. We need to harness more energy, not less. To sum up, We have an abundance of resources on Earth, and we should keep allocating them efficiently to produce more energy to raise everyone's standard of living, while also being mindful of environmental repercussions. When confronted with the complexity of economic realities, most people tend to retreat. They start talking about how they value family, friendship, love, art, and spirituality. They claim that numbers and graphs on screens are unappealing to them. In other words, that they prioritize what is non-economic. I know because I used to be one of them, and I'm here to tell you that I had this whole thing backwards. If you don't have any resources, or you don't know how to allocate them, how much can you really help your friends, your family, and your community? What good is it to identify as generous and yet have zero or very limited ability to actually help others? If you already are a generous person, understanding economics and growing your financial energy will only amplify your generosity to many more people. So instead of helping one, you will be able to help 100, or instead of helping 100, you will be able to help 1,000. To dive deeper into your non-economic pursuits, it helps to have more resources, more freedom, and more time to do so. Ironically, the mastery of economics will help you explore your non-economic pursuits. The market does not reward us for our values, talent, or effort, but for one thing only: to create as much value for others at as little cost as possible. Johann Norberg, The Capitalist Manifesto. In conclusion, my friends, workers, entrepreneurs, creators of the world, let us use our knowledge, our energy, and our creativity to generate as much value as possible for each other and for those around us. Let us have the courage to always accept reality, no matter how tempting the myths sound. So in the making of this video, I was able to see beyond the clouds of economic myths because I stood on the shoulders of giants. So for those of you who would like to explore this subject further, I'd love to share a few book recommendations. So if you want the best overall introduction to economics, I would recommend Principles of Economics by Saifedean Ammous and Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. If you love the debunking of economic myths, I suggest Economic Facts and Fallacies by Thomas Sowell. If you want to be enlightened about the lies of the current fiat economy, I recommend The Bitcoin Standard and the Fiat Standard by Saifedean Ammous, The Price of Tomorrow by Jeff Booth, and Broken Money by Lynn Alden. If you want to be more optimistic and hopeful about capitalism, I recommend The Capitalist Manifesto by Johann Norberg. And if you want to dive deep into the destructive pool of leftist collectivism, there is no better book than The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich A. Hayek. And on that note, my friends, stay strong, informed, and free.